Hi, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. So I thought today we could discuss and map out the Donner Party. And before I begin, I am zero expert on this, but last night I rewatched the 1990 documentary version of the Donner Party from PBS, which you can watch. And it's good. I remember watching it way back when. And I kind of reviewed some things just because I wanted to remember it all, because I was super fascinated with this story when I was younger. So I just thought we could kind of look at what happened and discuss it. But like I said, I'm not an expert or anything, so feel free in the comments to add thoughts. And it's a big story, so I'm not going to remember to tell you every single thing. But hopefully I'll get a bunch of it. But it'll just be interesting. If you're not familiar, I think everybody is somewhat familiar with the Donner Party. But there is some kind of ghastly things that happen along the way, but I won't go into, all the details of that. I mean, I'll talk about it. So if you don't want to hear that, maybe don't listen. But more than anything, we're just going to look at, what went wrong here. So the Donner Party was a group of what's the word I'm looking for? People, I don't know, I can't find the word, who were heading out west to California because, one reason is they had read a pamphlet from a man named Lansford Hastings, and he was a promoter of California, and he wrote a booklet called The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. And he said, everybody needs to come out here. It's like heaven. Now, this is pre-gold rush. So we're going back before the gold rush. So that wasn't the reason they were heading there. And at this time, there were only like 20,000 people who were not Spanish in California. And Hastings wanted to get enough, Americans into California to kind of push the Spanish out. So he had political motives for doing this and encouraging people. But in his book, The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, he touted a shortcut so that you wouldn't have to go as far. And he claimed it would cut off like 125 miles or something like that off the route. And we know that I forget which one. I think it was James Reed. He had a copy of that booklet with him on the route. So he was definitely, that was part of why he wanted to go. So like James Reed and George Donner, these men were pretty successful, especially James Reed. He was known to be wealthy. And they were leaving from Springfield, Illinois. So, am I going to need a better pen? So right in here. So they met up in Springfield, Illinois on April 16th of 1846. And here is where you have the Reed family, who were pretty wealthy, and the Donners. And so there were 32 members from this group, and 2 servants and 7 teamsters that the Reeds had with them. So the Reeds hired servants because they had like a 2-story wagon. I don't know. Maybe that's not quite right, but it was a huge wagon, and their daughter even kind of joked about it. And it had bunk beds and a kitchen of some sort. And so they had servants with them. They hired teamsters to handle all the oxen because the one wagon had to have like 8 oxen pull it. Now, you know, they're going on these just barely established wagon routes, but because of all the wagons running these routes, it did actually create grooves. So there was, sort of a makeshift road that the wagons would follow. And so they leave April 16th from Springfield, and they head over to Independence, Missouri. So they go this way. I have got to get a better. I'm sorry. Hold on. I feel like none of my markers are working properly. So they head over to Independence, Missouri. And this is where they meet up with more of the party who are going to head out to California. Now, the known day to leave from Independence, because this is where a lot of people would meet up to head out to California, wagon trains, I mean. The known day that you should definitely leave by is May 1st. May 1st. But the Donner Party doesn't leave until May 12th, which I hate saying that word, 12th. But in Independence, they purchase all the provisions they need. They get ready to head out. So I kind of forget if it's May 10th or May 12th, but I think it was May 12th. They're heading out. Now, like I said, they should have left by May 1st. That's kind of a known deadline because you have to go through all this way, and winter, can come kind of early. So they're already a little bit late leaving there, right? So they leave Independence and they head towards Fort Laramie, Wyoming. And I don't know exactly how this route goes. I'm not going to try to map. But anyway, that is, if it's a straight line, which it's not, because they have to go around rivers and they have to ford streams and go over hills and whatever. But anyway, they go out here to Fort Laramie, Wyoming. Now, when they get to Fort Laramie, a man has come from California. I believe he's on horseback with one other person or something. I'm not sure. And his name is James Kleiman. And James has come through, and he is an old, I think, military buddy, but he's like a grizzled mountain man kind of guy. He knows stuff. And he meets up with Reed, and he says, don't listen to, the immigrant's guide. Don't take that shortcut. That's a big mistake. Just go the old route. So that is what James Kleiman, he kind of warns him. He says, hey, don't do that. But Reed decides to ignore that advice. He disregards it. He says, look, Hastings says this cutoff is going to save us hundreds, I think he told him hundreds of miles, 125 miles or something, and many, many days of travel. And I have all my family. I have women. I have children. I mean, they had a big group of people with them. We're going to take the shortcut. So he was given a heads up by James Kleiman. But anyway, so that's on, so that happens in July. So by the time they make it to Fort Laramie, it is July 3rd through 5th. They take a break in Fort Laramie. Now, I listened to a podcast where this, I can't remember. I think it was You're Wrong About, and she had a guest on. And she said that they were drinking booze, and they hung out here because they wanted to celebrate the 4th of July. And that Reed held a drink up at the exact moment he had planned his friends would hold a drink up, and they'd toast the great nation. And she had a lot of stories like that. that they were partying a lot and getting drunk a lot, and they had condoms and things to instill abortions, and so they were having sex all the time. I really, really kind of question that narrative a little bit. I don't see in the writings or the diaries. Yeah, they drank whiskey, some of them and stuff, but this is a long haul. I mean, you're traveling like 10 miles a day through very rough terrain. And I question whether it's like a big party every night because you're exhausted. Everybody's exhausted. I don't know. I don't know about that narrative. I do question that narrative. But anyway, but they did stop for a few days. You could say to celebrate, or you could say to let their livestock, the oxen, rest and eat and drink. I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that. But anyway, so they're in Fort Laramie from July 3rd through the 5th. And then they head off to the Little Sandy River in Wyoming, which they go all the way across the state of Wyoming to here. And at the Little Sandy River, this is where most of the group that left Springfield at the same time as them turn to the right. I guess they turn to the right, and they take the original wagon trail that's already sort of established. And the Donner Party, now they're called the Donner Party because with the party was George Donner and Tamsen Donner. And they apparently were pretty nice people. Tamsen Donner kind of went down in history as a hero because she stuck by her husband through everything. And her plan to go out there was to find botanical plants that she could send back for cures for things. And she wanted to get away. She was an abolitionist. So she's kind of a little bit of a hero in the story. And then they had their children with them. And then there was James and Margaret Reed. And he was a wealthy businessman. And they did travel with a small stove and stuff. And then there was, and they had their children. And there are other people in the party. But they were the main two parties, the Reeds and the Donners. Now, the Reeds were the wealthy ones with all the big oxen and stuff, but they also slowed the group down because of their big trailers. They had to push them and double up oxen a lot and to get all these trailers through. Wagons, I should say wagons. So you'd think the Reed would be the head of the party, but the party voted, and they voted George Donner, to be the head. So that's why it's known as the Donner Party. Okay, so when they get to Little Sandy River, Wyoming, this is where they make the choice. They really have to sit and part ways. So not more than half, most of the party heads up the regular route. But the Donner Party with the Reeds decide to go the shortcut, the cutoff. So they have heard that Langford Hastings, who wrote the guide telling them to take the cutoff, has said, I'm going to meet your party at Fort Bridger, and I will lead you through the cutoff. So their next stop is to go from here to Fort Bridger. So they get to Fort Bridger expecting to meet Hastings. But instead, there's a note. And Hastings says, I can't meet you. And I just watched this documentary last night. I think he's leading another group. He's trying to get another group through. So he says, just start heading this way and I will route back and meet up with you. I'm pretty sure that's right. So anyway, and the note, the guys from, okay, here's another spot where the one podcast I listened to the wrong about, the woman said that the Fort Bridger, it was like, I forget the name of the guy, I think it was John Bridger or something, that he wanted them to go that way because he wanted to get it to be a regular route because there's a lot of money to be made in letting that be a route, and that he never actually gave them the note where, and she said the note said Langston kind of told them to turn back. That is not what the documentary from the 1990s said. They said the note said to keep, so I couldn't quite find anything. I don't know. But I do know in the documentary they said the Fort Bridger people said, it's okay, you can keep going. It's not that bad. Why they did that, I don't know. I don't know if we actually know the truth about that. But I guess there would be incentive for them to get people to go that way. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So they keep moving and they go from here. I'm trying to figure out how to do this so you guys can see over towards the Great Salt Lake, but this direction. Now I think the other group goes up this way somehow, but anyway, so they're going to the shortcut and they stop here in Echo Canyon. Oh, by the way, by the time they leave Fort Bridger, it is July 24th. Okay, this is when they leave Fort Bridger. All right, by the time they get to Echo Canyon in Utah, it is August 4th. And Langston again isn't there, and there's a note from him. Now, when they left Fort Bridger to Echo Canyon, they made pretty good progress. They were like, hey, this thing's not too bad, we might really cook. But once they get to Echo Canyon, there's a note from Hastings, and he says the route that he told them to take is impassable, and wait in Echo Canyon for him. He'd come back and help them. And they decide, nah, let's send one of our men. So they sent James Reed to go find him and find out what's going on, to go ahead. So I think he probably went on horseback. I don't really know. And he goes up forward and he does find Hastings. And Hastings says, look, I'm not going to come back for you. I'm not going to come back for your group. You guys could take this other route. So they climb to like a mountain, to like a little high point. And the two of them stand there and look off. And Hastings says, hey, take that route. See, it looks pretty smooth over there. That's going to be the way to go. So James Reed heads back, meets back up with his group, and that ends up taking, 2 days. So it's not until August 5th that they leave Echo Canyon on what is hopefully a better route than the one that's impassable. Okay. So the problem is, and this is where the problems really begin, that takes them through what is known as the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. So they go down here, I guess, below, and they end up here. This is where the desert is in Utah. And I could be wrong. Correct me in the comments if I am. But I believe this is where the salt flats are, the Bonneville races. That's all on the salt. So if you can picture that, I think that's where we are in Utah. And it's just a desert of salt. I mean, imagine that. And during the daytime, it's searing heat. There's no plants. It's just reflecting off this sort of saltiness. But it does get wet, and the wagons sink into it, and the oxen sink. And with all that salt, the dehydration's intense. And at night, because there's nothing to hold the heat, it's just frigid wind blowing across this thing. It's misery, honestly. And one of the parties, I think it was the Reeds maybe, but their wagon sinks in. They can't move it. The rest of the party's ahead of them. They end up grabbing up everything they can and they walk and have to sleep on the desert floor. And the girl, one of the girls, wrote in her journal entry or something that it was so frigid they put everything on top of them, and then the dogs. And she said if it hadn't been for the dogs on top of them, they would have frozen to death. I mean, it's just a terrible situation, and they're dehydrated. The animals are dehydrated and dying. So anyway, 87 members go into this, and they were told it would be 40 miles in 2 days, but it ended up being 80 miles in 5 days. So it was real bad. So then they make it through. Well, some of them, without all their wagons and without all their oxen, but they get through. But now they're so far behind. They are way behind everybody else who's gone around. So they keep going across here until they get to Humboldt River, Nevada. So now they're here in Nevada. Now, I could be incorrect. We all know I could be incorrect. But I think about here is where they meet up with not meet up with because they're way ahead of them. They're way behind them, I should say. But the other group has come around this way. And I think this is getting back to the normal route. This was the shortcut that actually ended up taking them way longer. So they stop here at Humboldt River. And by this point, people are like actually literally going kind of crazy because there's not enough provisions. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough people have starved and dehydrated, and they had to leave provisions behind in the desert. It's bad. So by the time they get here, they're kind of going crazy. And I think it was one of the Teamsters named John Snyder, he starts whipping an oxen like really crazy. And he's just kind of going a little, crazy. And James Reed, my understanding, he's trying to like stop him, and he starts whipping towards people because he has like a whip for the cattle. And James Reed pulls out a knife and kills him, and stabs him and kills him. So then they have like a little court, and people don't like James Reed very much because he's been rich and he's slowed them down with his big wagons, and they're kind of done with this guy anyway, I think. And then he killed this other man. So they say, we're going to hang him. Let's hang him. And James Reed's wife, Margaret, begs for them to not hang him and to let him just be vanquished from the group. And so they decide, okay, that's what we'll do. So they tell James Reed, you're kicked out. You have to go. And that happens here. So James Reed leaves, takes off. And for a couple of days, he kind of left letters and trees, according to like one of his family's letters, journal entries or something. But then it just stopped. Well, what actually happened is James Reed kept going. He manages. The end point is actually over here in California, in the area that's now Sacramento. That is Sutter's Fort, California at the time. And that is the end point for all the travelers. They're all trying to get there. So he does make it there. He comes out looking completely ragged and half dead by the time he gets there. And he tells everybody at Sutter's Fort, hey, all these people are still back here. We got to bring provisions. But most of the men were fighting Spain, Mexico for control of California. So there weren't really a lot of people there to go send a mission in. But they did. They did. I think it took a little time for him to get a group together, but they did. But before that happens, the Donner family and the Donner party, I guess I should say, has left Humboldt River. And they're trying to make their way across this mountain range right here, known as the Sierra Nevada. And they are leaving way too late in the season. Almost everybody else has already made it to Sutter's Fort, all the other parties who left. And the only people left are the Donner party. And a snowstorm hits. A really bad snowstorm. So the first major snowstorm started in late October. And this series of snowstorms in the Sierra Nevada is the worst on record, I think, to this day. It was just really bad. So that's when the snow starts. And they are just have not made it. So, let me see if I can find. Okay. I think it's like right in here, actually, near Reno. Oh, here it is, Truckee. Okay. So the party gets to here. Look how, it's not like they're that close because, oh, can you see? Hold on, sorry. Let me see if I can flip this map around a little bit. Okay. Sorry. I thought you could see. All right, so this is Reno, which, by the way, I think my son's in Reno this week. Very exciting. So this is Truckee Lake. Now they have made it over here, but by the time they get here to Truckee Lake area, that's when the snow starts falling. The snow starts to come down. So the Donner party camps at Alder Lake, and the Reeds are at Truckee Lake because one of their wagons got stuck, and so the other group moved ahead. So they're actually kind of at two separate locations, but not far from each other, and they're all just stuck in this snow, and the snow keeps coming and coming and coming down and coming down, and it turns out that year they got 30 feet of snow. I mean, imagine. So up at Truckee Lake, there are actually cabins, and some people were inside the cabins or built lean-tos, but the Donners were back with their wagon. But anyway, so then James Reed does get a group together, and they're all just stuck. They can't move. They keep trying. They keep trying to go up across these mountains, but they just can't get through the snow. It's just so deep and just impossible. But James Reed, I'm pretty sure it's James Reed. I'm pretty sure it's him. He brings 2 Indian guides with him, and they come back up and they come into camp, and he can't believe it, but his wife and all his kids are still alive, and he's like, wow. So they take a group. Boy, now I'm questioning my story, but I hope this is right. So they take a group that they name the Forlorn Hope. And this is a group of 17 people, and they're attempting to cross the mountain on foot, and they'll get help and bring it back. So they've been there since October. This is December, you guys. That's how long they've been living on the rations that they had left. They were eating their shoe, the leather that they use for shoelaces. They had some leather for like a tarp for the top of their, cabins, or as a floor, but eventually they boiled all that and ate it. They were eating just anything they could. I'm sure they killed the oxen. And they did try to hunt. I think they caught a couple of deer and owls and birds and stuff, but not enough to feed the group. It's just, if you've ever watched a show alone, it ain't that easy, especially with all that snow. So what was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So the Forlorn Hope made handmade snowshoes, and they took the people who they felt like were the strongest and would be able to make the crossing. And I believe, I'm pretty sure that part of Reed's family, and it was a crazy story. Like, they left the 8-year-old with the 3-year-old behind, and she took care of him. And the mom and the children they thought could make it went. Is that right? Or was that a different group? Anyway, I'm not sure, but that was a crazy story. So the Forlorn Hope leaves in December. They make it to the top of the mountain that they were trying to go over, but once they hit the top, the sun is reflecting off the snow, and they start to go snowblind. And they're out of provisions, and this is a lot of work, hiking through all this. They're exhausted. So the guy who was leading them, who helped them make the snowshoes and stuff, his name was Charles Stanton, and he went totally blind from the snow, and he was exhausted. So he said, just leave me behind. And apparently he said, you can take me as provision. He said, or take me as provision, meaning you might need to eat it. And the group was like, oh no, that's crazy. We're not doing that. But by a few days later, they were like, we will all die if we don't get food. So they drew lots. So they all put a bunch of sticks, and whoever drew the longest stick was the one they were going to use as food, kill and eat. And this one guy drew the longest lot, but then they were all like, no, we can't do it. We can't kill you. That's crazy. But by the next day, people were dying anyway, and they decided, okay, we will have to do this to survive. And so they did, and they made sure that no one ever ate a relative of their own. So they'd mark it very carefully, what pieces they had and everything. And they managed to make it to Sutter's Fort. They actually made it first to some cabin, where one of them knocked on the cabin door and was so sick looking. The woman was like, oh my God, so she took him in, and he was telling her all these stories about what was going on, and she helped them all somehow get to Fort Sutter. I believe she gave them some provisions. But yeah, things went bleak. Now, left behind were a group of the Reeds and a group of the Donners, and there were other people too who were still back there. And they did have to resort to, eating whatever they had, which was sometimes people who had died. And there was one man in particular, when they finally went back in to find them, they said they crossed the frozen lake where they were supposed to be, and they didn't see anybody. It was just empty. And then these people started to crawl out from the snow, because all the cabins were so completely covered in snow. The snow was 30 feet, that they had to crawl out of the snow. And they said they looked like they were dead people almost coming out. And it was very traumatic, obviously. And mostly women and children. So wow. But there was one guy Well, the first group who came in found all these women and children, all these people, and they took out the strongest of them, and they took them back out of here. They gave them provisions and helped them, and got them out. And they left behind the sickest, which I think was James Reed and Louis Kesberg. And then also, I'm sorry, not James Reed, George Donner. And also George Donner's wife, Tamsin Donner. She said, I'm not going to leave my sick husband. I will stay here with him. And she did. Well, when they finally came back to rescue the last of them, Louis Kesberg was surrounded by bones of humans. And the story went that there was oxen legs nearby that he didn't eat. And he said, I didn't like the taste of those. What? And Tamsin Donner, who some say was pretty healthy when they left, was also missing, and they didn't find her bones. They never found her. And so the tabloids, or the newspapers after the fact, who were very sensational, kind of made it out like this Louis Kesberg guy was a ghoul, and that he maybe had murdered Tamsin, just to eat her, and that he didn't want to eat the oxen, he'd rather eat humans. And really, and he did tell stories. He kind of boasted about it a little bit, but I don't know. So now, historically, you look at it and you don't know, was all this cannibalism as prevalent as it's made to be after the fact, or was that newspapers just telling a good story to make it all sound very ghoulish and exciting? All the Donners ended up dying. I think their whole family died. And I think all the Reeds actually lived through it. But one of the children of the Reeds, I forget her name, she later in life actually said she talked to Louis Kesberg about it. And he swore up and down he did not ever, murder Tamsin. And she said she believed him, that she didn't believe he had done that. So that's the story. And there's I think they've gone in and tried to look at evidence. They never really found bones. I don't know. I watched some documentary later where they tried to look, and they said they didn't see evidence that anybody murdered anyone. So those stories seem to maybe be exaggerated. But the main things that really screwed them up was that, first of all, they just left late. But even with that, it seems like they could have made it because the other wagon trains made it. So I've always heard them leaving late was a big factor. But I'm not sure, because it seems like all the other wagons that left with them made it. The big problem was taking that Hastings cutoff. And by the way, Hastings wrote that book. I don't know if I said this. The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, with the Hastings cutoff listed as the way to go. And he had never even done it ever himself. Never. So that's pretty bad. So they really got delayed, going through the Salt Lake, going through the Wasatch Mountain range. That all slowed them down. It just ended up taking way longer, the Hastings cutoff, which then got them into the Sierra Nevada mountains way too late. And that year, there happened to be a big storm, and it was a very early snow in October that was heavy. And they were just short on food. And even starting off, some of them were sick. There was actually a grandma who had consumption, who they said, you shouldn't go. Well, she died before they even made it, to the hard part. So, and I think other people had consumption. It was just a mess. Yeah. So, just an interesting story. But it does seem like the cannibalism was after the people were already dead. For them, it seems. There's no real evidence that anyone murdered. Oh, I know what I forgot to tell you. With the Forlorn Hope group, though, they did have these Indian guides. And when they decided they should eat the dead, the Indian guides apparently said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't do that. And the next, within a few days, James Reed went to the guides and he said, they're talking about killing you guys to eat you. And you better take off. Because he was friends with these guides. He'd brought them in to begin with. And so the guides at first didn't really believe that. They were like, what? No, they're not going to, like, we're the guides. But they realized this is really going to happen. So the two guides, Indian guides, left. Now, the story goes that later they saw blood on the trail and they followed it and they found the two guides who had been injured somehow and they were dead. And so they ate them. But some accounts say that they were injured and not doing well, and so one of the party shot them in the head and then they ate them. But some wonder, and I might even wonder, did you just catch up to them and why were they injured? Why would there be blood on the trail? I don't know. So that is probably the bigger incidents where I would go, I don't know, that seems a little sketchy to me. I don't know. But anyway, they did send in 4 different rescue parties. There was one in February, one in March, another in March, and another in April. So, it took quite a few parties to slowly pull people out of here. That's how bad it was. And that's, by the time the rescue parties got in, the provisions would be low again. It's just hard to, carry that much with you through all this. It's rough, man. But the way we even know about it, like, there was a guy named Patrick Breen. He kept a diary. Some of the children, one of the children in particular who lived through it, this part I questioned too. She wrote about it for years to come. She didn't die until like 1930. Like, she had a long life. And I'm a little confused because I read one place she was 12 years old, but I thought on the documentary I watched, they said she was 3. I'm like, would a 3-year-old remember all this? I don't know. And then Louis Kessberg, the one who was kind of the ghoul, he talked about it for a while. And then he kind of became a hermit because he was so villainized by people. And Lansford Hastings, who wrote the Hastings Cutoff, he kind of took off and he went on to, I think he told in real estate, but the politics I think he got out of because he was into politics of getting California to be a U.S. state, which it did become, being taken over from Spain. So I don't know. I'm trying to think if I've left anything. I'm sure I have. It's a big story. But yeah, interesting. So yeah, I think the route they should have taken was probably something like this. But they took the shortcut that took them through, a kind of mountain range and a desert, and just was, I think, was like 135 miles longer than this route because you had to go back and forth around stuff and across. It just took way longer, which got them into this area of the mountains way too late, and they got caught in one of the biggest snowstorms ever in the area. So everything kind of worked against them. But an interesting story for sure. So let me know if you have any other tidbits from that whole thing. going out in a wagon. My grandmother. That seems crazy because she's not even my great grandmother. She's my grandma. She took, I guess she went on the, I thought originally, I'll have to ask my mom, that she took a wagon and left. I'm not sure. I think she was in Ohio maybe, and went to Montana. Like near Helena. And then she'd take the train back and forth because she ended up going to school at Harvard. So she'd take the train. But her dad was a doctor out here. Like, it's so crazy to think how much things have changed within just a few generations. But you know, this, like I said, was pre-Gold Rush. Now, there was like a year or two period, not very long, where people were like scared after the Donner Party sensationalism newspapers went out. And they didn't really travel out to California as much. And then they found gold in them there are hills. And when the gold was found, it was like, I think like 500,000 people traveled within a 10-year period out to California to find gold. So that was really the big gold rush happened. Yeah. But all the rest of the wagon train that left made it. It was just the Donner Party. So this cutoff is really truly what killed them. It wasn't leaving late. It was